Hey everyone, welcome back to the Meme Team podcast, where we dissect the marketing strategies creating breakout cultural moments. We're welcoming back Mark Stenberg from Adweek this week. Welcome, Mark. Or welcome
Hey,
back.
Sonia. Yeah, glad to be back.
Awesome. Let's just jump into some fun stuff that's happening. The Oscars were announced last week, and sure enough, Timothée Chalamet has been nominated. It's actually a good thing that Mark is back on, because we talked about Timothée Chalamet when he was last on here. We were both fans and just really excited about all the marketing campaigns that he was doing. He had just launched the Zoom video at the time, and that, prolonged campaign just ended up being, super successful, not just for the movie, which is crossing 100 million domestic box office, which is the highest for an A24 film domestically. And it's looking as if it's going to get up to 120, 130 million this week. But it's also successful in how he's been campaigning for the Oscar. And since then, he's won the Golden Globe. So that's, pretty cool. Did you see both the win and that he's been nominated for the Oscar, Mark?
I saw the film and I saw the nomination, and I think to our previous discussion, I think it kind of makes a lot of sense. The marketing effort was pretty creative, and it was certainly full scale. So I think to the degree that the Oscars or whomever recognize the effort that goes into marketing, I don't know about that, but they certainly made it pretty surround sound. And I think the marketing also sort of like reinforced the elements of the film that were its most compelling. It was this story of like an underdog in the ping pong world, which are these like very, I don't want to say countercultural, but not like very mainstream areas of affinity. And then I think just the breadth of the different sort of like channels that they were making use of, I think just lends to the idea that this is something that hasn't been done before. And I think on some level that probably ends up, having some effect on the awards that it reaps.
Yeah, I think a bigger thing here is that Hollywood insiders, cast and crew, everybody that votes for these awards are trying to send a resounding message that movie marketing, it matters, but also indie films matter, right? Like the fact that he put so much behind this to actually, put himself out there and like tied the success of the movie to like his success personally, and it actually ended up working, I think is something that people are like realizing, oh shit, like maybe this is something that we should be, focusing on a little bit more than like we would like to. Obviously, there's a lot of hubbub happening in Hollywood as they kind of figure out like where the profit centers are. Like, is it still the movies? Are the stars worth, paying for as much as we're paying for them versus like the cast and crew? We saw the example of Ben and Matt with The Rip doing the profit sharing with Netflix, so that the cast and crew, all 1,200 of them, would get some upside if the movie does well on the platform, right? So these are like new things that like people are trying to explore. And I think this also follows on with F1 being nominated for Best Movie, right? Because, arguably you could say it's not really the best movie of like last year, but you got to remember who votes for this, right? There's a lot of cast and crew that like, are placing their vote. And I think what they are trying to send a message here is in, saying, hey, we need to reward Apple for spending the amount of, time and money that they did to not only like, yes, get the movie out there, but like reward them for building the cameras that they needed to build in order to like film the cars the way that they needed to. A lot of people were like super impressed with like how that, how it was filmed, but then also how it showed up on IMAX, right? Because it's like you really felt like you were there, like watching the cars. I think this is like a way for them to reward like bringing like art and craft back to the movies and rewarding, the people that were involved in that. Do I think they're going to win like best movie? Probably not. But like the nomination is enough, and they went ahead and got like the best editing and best like sound effects and stuff. So it's all just like craft related Oscar nominations.
Yeah, I feel like the sort of technical mastery element is, or technical innovation element is, I remember there was some element of it where you could watch the trailer on your iPhone and get that haptic feeling of the engine rumbling. The little things that people haven't done before. I mean, it strikes me as sort of hitting the same chord for Oscar voters that also comes by shooting on IMAX or shooting with
Mhm.
VistaVision or whatever. It's like, here is a technical innovation or a throwback or like an affectation that lends something to the film that the awards community wants to sort of genuflect to and acknowledge and say the craft is made better for experimentation of this sort, and we appreciate it. Similarly, on an economic perspective, I have to imagine that like the Oscars are like, Apple, yes, please, we would
Mhm.
love for you to continue, diverting some minuscule portion of your massive budget to making films. And I was remembering as you were saying, I remember Apple either won Best Picture or more likely was nominated for Best Picture with Coda. And
Mhm.
just for the number of films that they've put out there, their representation in awards categories, they're punching above their weight
Mhm.
on some level. And I wonder if that's still them trying to figure out what's going to be our sort of like differentiator from
Mhm.
standard films. Is it going to be these technical elements? Is it going to be our integration of the hardware that people might watch these on with the
Mhm.
experiences contained in the films themselves? I don't know, but kind of Apple's streaming and film ambitions have been like a little bit questionable up
Mhm.
until now. Like, it's like, what are they getting at? But if they continue to get these Best Picture nominations, those questions maybe start to sort themselves out.
Yeah, definitely. Just yeah, in comparison, I mean, Netflix and Warner Brothers were the two highest, nominated studios this year. Very noticeably, noticeably, Paramount was not. So I think that might be a silent rebuke against the Ellison family, who bought Paramount and are trying to buy Warner Brothers instead of Netflix. So these like more like silent ways of showing who you favor and like what you favor is speaking a lot more if we like pay attention to it. And I also wanted to mention that Sinners won the most nominations ever for a film. So, really cool for them. We talked about them here as well, just like in the novelty in how Ryan Coogler was talking about the differences in IMAX filming versus other like films, and then also like the sound quality and like why it matters. And I think to your point, Mark, we're starting to see a rise in people being very interested in IMAX screenings, so much so that they're going to start building a couple more IMAX theaters around the country. Because right now it's only really the major cities that have them. That's like something where it's like they know that if people want to go to the movies, they want to go to IMAX. So, like, they're investing in those theaters going forward.
Yeah, my only thought on those is I love them, but then I think the thinking is let's create a in theater experience that is
Hmm.
vastly superior to an at home streaming experience, and therefore
Hmm.
that's the sound quality and the quality of the picture on the app. But it also makes just the ticket prices so expensive, and it really has to turn movies from like oh, you could see one every other week or but it's like you buy like 4 tickets to IMAX. I mean, that's uh, easily over $100. So
But
that's my
people
only
aren't
concern.
buying, yeah, but people aren't buying movie tickets to begin with. So if
Yeah.
it becomes more of a like an experience of like, hey, we're investing in this, you get more comfortable seats, you get a big ass screen,
Right.
you get better sound quality. Maybe they start, thinking about how to entice people a little bit more with different like food options and other like experiences at the theater. Maybe that's a way to balance it out. But yeah, I mean, overall, I think movie tickets are just in a slump overall. So, this is a way to kind of counteract that.
Yeah, I mean, sorry to go on about it, but it strikes
No,
me
yeah.
similar to what we're talking about with airlines a little bit, where they're sort
Mhm.
of making greater profits by selling more premium tickets kind of thing. And
Mhm.
it's like, okay, not necessarily fewer people are flying per se, but costs are rising. And so they need
Right.
revenue to increase. And so they're saying, we're going to sell add-ons and premium seats and have the per seat price increase. And that will
Mhm.
continue to have this model remain viable. I think on some level, theaters are saying the same thing. If fewer
Mhm.
people are coming, how can we charge more per seat? Which I
Mhm.
understand that the calculus of keeping the theater model alive. But I'm not like a super theater guy, but I do like
Mhm.
to see a few movies in theaters a year. And I'm like,
Yeah.
man, it just gets a little pricey, and it could have a
Yeah, yeah.
dissuasive effect depending on how ardent your zeal is for watching movies in theaters.
Yeah, I definitely think that they need to come up with like a new thing. Maybe it's like doing price changes depending on like, is it, the first weekend and then you start lowering it as it like, it's been in the
Dynamic
theater
pricing.
longer. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
right. Because I agree that there needs to be some change. But at least they're trying to improve it by
Mhm.
making bigger screens like IMAX and having that whole experience versus what we have with Southwest, which is what you were referring to. They've just gotten rid of open seating after last year getting rid of the two free checked bags. They were bought up by private equity. And it's no longer that you want to have the best customer service and the best product, but you want to get as much money as you can. My biggest thing here is that like Southwest was the only brand that stood separate to all the rest of them, right? I really question whether getting rid of something that was so closely tied to the brand and a huge reason why people wanted to fly the airline is going to be successful when you're just going to be competing against United and Delta, who have, stronger loyalty brand programs that, people really, optimize for. And then you have the lower, budget brands like Frontier, though I did hear that they might be, going through bankruptcy. Sorry, Spirit was going through like bankruptcy. So clearly there's something not happening with budget airlines as well. But yeah, we'll see where kind of Southwest fits in with all the airlines when now there's not that differentiator.
You're absolutely right. I don't envy any brand that has to be in that position because
Mhm.
you have to assume it's a necessity to make that decision. Otherwise, yeah, you're sacrificing this core point of distinction, and there's no going back from that. And you've alienated your base, and
Yeah.
um, it's concerning.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Awesome. Well, let's go into the regularly scheduled programming. So I wanted to talk about Substack TV. They just launched on January 22nd, part of a multi-year push into video that started with video posts in 2022, monetization in early 2025, and then a TikTok style feed in March 2025. They let longtime subscribers know that you can watch videos and live streams from creators that they follow. Most notably is that their positioning has shifted from home for long form writing to home for the best long form work. So it's already assuming that the written word isn't going to be the major way that Substack continues growing. This coming on the heels of TikTok changing ownership from ByteDance to a like conglomerate overseen by notably the Ellison family. Many of us that are on TikTok maybe realize that it has changed a lot since the ownership changed, the censoring of some of the videos that are getting posted, mostly political ones. So the fact that Substack is launching this around the same time and is kind of opening the doors for creators to be focused on video to optimize fully for Substack TV is kind of a smart play. On the one hand, on the other hand, you have a lot of the writers who are questioning why they're shifting away from, long form writing. But I think, as many of us in marketing have realized, video is kind of the future. It's what a lot of people end up ingesting over long form content. Even a lot of the writers are creating video content themselves. And you've also seen a huge push into video podcasts like this one. And we just saw that Netflix has a deal with Spotify and other like video podcasters. So it's really showing that like Substack is thinking about growth, yes, but then also what the future is of like where people are, what they're looking at, and where they're going to be and where they're going to go when all these things are in flux. Mark, would love your thoughts on Substack TV.
I agree with you. I think this is largely a byproduct of this push that you're seeing from a variety of social platforms to the Neil Mohan at YouTube says all the time, you want to own the living room, right?
Mhm.
And it's going from CTV was this massive rush a few years ago as streamers look to really expand there. Now we're seeing social platforms say, well, why not us too? And I think YouTube really personifies that because it's always been both sort of streaming channel and social media. And so it was competing against, the Disneys and the Netflixes on the one hand, but it was also competing against the Instagrams and, let's say, even the Patreons or the TikToks on the other hand. So now you have somebody like Substack who is joining this large list of creator monetization companies, is what I think they would call themselves now, saying if we want to court creators seriously, we have to give them a way to produce video and have that be easily consumable by audiences. And if we're playing with video, we have to be in the living room. So we have to be on televisions. So I get it as a natural extension of that video strategy, but it doesn't make a lot of sense for a few other reasons to me. Namely, the core criticism of Substack continues to be that it doesn't really have ads. Nowadays, you create video, you put it on TikTok, you put it on Reels, you put it on YouTube, you put it on all the different platforms. The only platform I would want my viewers not to watch my video on would be the one that makes no money, which
Yeah.
is only Substack. You know what I mean? Like if I had my video on YouTube and Substack, I'd be like, please watch it on YouTube. It does me
Yeah.
no good to watch this on Substack. I know I work at Adweek, so I have some skin in the game here, but um, the criticism of Substack is that you're not monetizing 95% of your views. And that holds especially true on video because advertisers love video advertising. The whole point is that people are logged in, leaned in, watching attentively. And then you're sort of, from a monetization standpoint, letting that go to waste. So I'd be a lot more on board with this once we see them rolling out ads. Um, and then the second element to this that's like a little bit confusing to me is just from a distribution perspective, how do you get people to turn on the Substack TV app? It's really hard to get somebody to watch a third party app. And especially when the content on that, in this case, Substack TV, isn't going to be exclusive there either. Again, I
Mhm.
imagine all these creators are going to be sharing this video in all these different spaces. So what's the sort of like value add or what's the compelling element that gets somebody to turn on Substack TV? I don't really see it. So I see this as Substack sort of like building out products that they will need, but ahead of the monetization that they need for those products to make sense.
Yeah. So a little pushback on them not doing ads. So back in December, they did announce that they're doing sponsored ads with certain creators. Basically, the way that the Substack model kind of works right now is that each of the creators have to go and get their own sponsors to sponsor their ads. Substack is trying to become a middleman for that relationship because a lot of creators are like, the worst part about having to write is having to find people to sponsor my newsletter, right? No word yet on how successful it is. So I think this is kind of like working to like get that started. The other thing I will say is that when Substack first announced that they were going to create a Twitter-like platform for their long-form content, everyone was like, why would you do that? Twitter exists, blah, blah, blah. Well, somehow Substack has become like the dark horse of like social media platforms because like I have so many friends, creators and like, marketing folks alike that are just moving over to the platform because Twitter is a fucking mess, right? Like they don't like being on Twitter as much anymore. They aren't really finding people that they like to engage with on LinkedIn because that just seems too like B2B SaaS, blah, blah, blah. Whereas Substack is kind of becoming the place where they go to have like intelligent conversations with other people that are like writing expert level type, analyses or, content that you can't really find elsewhere. Do I think people are going to go into their Apple TV to like download Substack TV? Probably not. But if it's going to integrate a little bit more easily to the app itself, which people are, going to a lot more, then I can see that working. But the hard part is going to be like how they kind of prioritize video versus, what they're originally meant for, which is long form content going forward. So that'll be an interesting thing to kind of see.
Yeah. I think this all stands in relation to the original question you posed, which is Substack started as this writing platform.
Mhm.
It's expanded to become a creator monetization platform now. What will it be next, kind
Yeah.
of thing. And again, not to be a hammer seeing everything as a nail here, but how does that incorporate ads or not? You know what I
Yeah, no,
mean?
I mean, they're
Like,
definitely gonna have to figure that out as well. Like, there has to
yeah.
be some way for creators to continue making money. Another thing of TikTok has basically gotten rid of their creator program, so they won't be paying out
Mm,
to people anymore. Obviously, there's been a change in how Twitter payouts work. Aside from the $1 million like blog that's supposed to win. No update on how that's going, by the way. Ultimately, that's what creators want is like, how are they gonna make how are they going to get their bag, you know?
I do think that there's something funny to be said, though. Substack's blessing and curse in many ways was that it started as a tool for this very vocal community,
Hmm.
i.e., writers or journalists. And that helped it gain like a really disproportionately large amount of thought share, mind
Hmm.
share, because people in the media were talking about it all the time. In reality, I mean, what was the last numbers? Like 25 million in revenue or 50 million in revenue? I mean,
Hmm.
it's a really small company and yet it's become a verb, you know what I mean? And
Hmm.
that's the benefit of like catering to this community. The downside of catering to this community is that God forbid you add video,
I
or
know.
God forbid you stray away from like the pure truth of the written word. Now everybody's laying into them for abandoning their roots and changing
Hmm.
and going corporate and whatever. And now, I mean, Substack's always done a really good job of like riding the highs and the lows of public sentiment. Like that's just kind of come and go. But this is the price that you pay for, like, yes, you got that outsized attention at your onset because of the audience that you cater to, but now we're seeing a lot of that turn against them as they just become a creator monetization platform. But I would argue they're just speed running what every other VC backed tech company that caters to content creators eventually does. I think we're going to start to see the same thing at Beehive, which is like
Hmm.
currently positioning itself as what Substack used to be,
Yeah.
plus some more. And I'm like, we're just a year or two away from Beehive doing
Mm.
exactly what Substack did. Meanwhile, Patreon is trying to be more like Substack, as Substack's
Yeah.
trying to be more like Patreon. And it's the whole thing where like Instagram and TikTok and YouTube, they all look the same. Every
Hmm.
creator monetization platform is going to look the same. And then it just comes down to marketing,
Yeah.
which we'll probably talk about later. But anyway, this is my like jaded perspective. Like, these
Yeah.
things all just become one another after enough time.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Okay, cool. Lessons to be learned is kind of, riffing off what you just said. Um, is community pushback a signal? Like, do you listen to what the community is saying? Your most vocal critics saying, like, go back to long form. That's what you were intended to do. Or do you pursue what you see happening in, the rest of, tech and like social media, right? You said that they're trying to be like Patreon. I think they're trying to be more like Instagram or YouTube TV, right? Where it's like creators know that they have to be on there in order to like build up an audience, and so they want to become a default social media platform that gets creators to post their content on there. They're still the default for writing. You mentioned Beehive is trying to come in and take some of the pie. There are some changes that you've seen some creators say have made them leave the platform, most notably who's owning like the email list. So I think like Substack is trying to force people to use the app a little bit more, which will help with this like video platform that they're trying to create, in order to like get creators to post more of their content. So here is an avenue where I think they're not going to listen to the community. I think they're going to, plow ahead with, their vision of like what they want to do. They've gotten pushback before, right? Like who should be allowed to write on the platform, right? Should it be open to everybody, or should there be a little bit more like censoring and like content moderation? Whereas, we've seen other like companies listen to that pushback, right? Like the Cracker Barrel incident that happened last year, right? They ended up listening to all the pushback and removing all the new branding. And I think this is also another like push in the direction of having that like independent media distribution of like, it's more important than ever for like companies and brands to be on these platforms, in order to create their own content and get in front of like users. Discoverability. There's other types of content that people are starting to expect, whether that's like blogs and like written long form content about like product updates, why it matters, like why you're, building in that direction. More importantly, video content, because that's where people are. That's what people are expecting now. And, Substack is betting that that's, the future. So that's what they're building and that's what they're pushing their creators to do.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I'd be curious, do you use the app? Just rapid fire
So
question.
not as much as I should be. I've started writing a like meme team newsletter, which I am putting on Substack. But I have seen a lot of like friends creators that like have shifted over to posting more of their content on Substack. So I am more curious to see how it works and learn how to do it a little bit more.
Yeah. I've had a funny thing where I was like an early adopter of the app, and then just like a
Mhm.
few weeks ago, I didn't delete the app. It still populates if I click through social or something like that. But I
Mhm.
now get the newsletters back in my inbox as it
Mhm.
used to be 5
Mm.
years ago or whatever, and I'm reading them so much more. Personally, again, if
Yeah.
you're like a person who's like, I just want the newsletter,
Yeah.
then the inbox solution is still great, in my opinion.
Awesome. Um,
Yeah. So topic number two, heated rivalry enters into what, week four, week five, week six of
mhm.
its insane spin zone. I think that the big news this last weekend was the two stars of the show, Hudson Williams and Connor Story, carrying the Olympic torch through Milan. If you haven't heard of heated rivalry by now, you're living under a rock, but
Yeah.
obviously it is a romance story about two professional hockey players in this like on again, off again situation where they're closeted. They eventually kind of fall for each other and come out at the end. But it's really made ripples for a variety of reasons. I think on the one hand, specifically, it's just an original story. I mean, it takes these two concepts that you don't really think of as having much overlap, which is queer romance and professional hockey, and setting them together. And it's just one of those intersections that almost because the novelty of it is so fresh to people and so fun that it is inspiring a kind of uh, fantasy, but not in the negative sense of it. If I'm editorializing here a little bit, it's a beautiful story. It's a great romance in and of itself. It has elements of diverse storytelling that used to be really championed amongst major media companies, and in the last several years have sort of become four-letter words. That it's a queer love story is amazing, and that is sort of central to the plot and not just sort of like a tack on to it. I think that this proves in many ways that that desire from audiences for that kind of content is still very much there, even if content creators and streaming companies have decided to sort of throttle back on DEI or representation in film or whatever the case. I think maybe perhaps most relevantly of all, as I noted at the beginning, with them walking into the Winter Olympics with the torch, they're also just the beneficiaries of great timing. You know,
Mm.
the hockey season just started, the Winter Olympics are just starting. I think, again, editorializing a little bit, it's a really bleak time geopolitically. The television show occurs both in the US and Canada. I think relations between those two countries have never been tenser than they are now. I think there's a real desire. You probably could have said this anytime over the last 10 years. There's a real desire for escapism right now, I think, in America, and for a heartwarming story. And then the marketing element here that I think comes into play that I sort of alluded to at the beginning is that HBO has absolutely made these poor stars do every possible like press hit under the sun. They've been on every show. They've been modeling. They were at Paris Fashion Week. Now they're in Milan. They're doing
They were at the Golden
interviews.
Globes.
There's obviously a season two. I mean, they kudos to this organization. They found out that this was going to be a hit, and they stepped on it in a serious way. And then this will be the last point. I want to get your thoughts on it. I think it also speaks to really interesting communities. Like, I think part of why this has been such a pop culture phenomenon is that it speaks to queer audiences and female audiences, and that's been well documented. Those two groups are often sort of like the jet fuel that propulses, if that's a word, pop culture, so getting those two audiences to really sort of like latch on to a show is a pretty surefire way of making sure that it makes it into the cultural conversation. And then speaking for myself as a straight man, we've talked a little bit about there's even a new viewership of straight either male hockey fans or not male hockey fans or whatever the case, but straight audiences, specifically straight male audiences, who are tuning into this again because it's original, because it's about hockey on some level, because it is a great romantic story just on its own. I think Wesley Morris at the New York Times was talking about how this is at a time in which we are lamenting the male loneliness epidemic and the stagnant EQ growth of men across the country. This is a time and a show where you see men talking about how they feel very openly and confidently and eloquently.
Yeah. So this came across my feed because New York Magazine had written an article about how straight men are taking to TikTok to show their reactions to, the show Heated Rivalry. And I thought it was, like, funny on the one hand because you're right, usually this is, like, female-driven and queer audiences that, drive this type of popularity, but the fact that it had made it into, like, the straight male audience, and they're then putting their reactions, to the show on TikTok as, like, a trend, means that it had reached escape velocity. It was interesting that, like, straight men, felt that they could watch heated rivalry over regular romance, right? And I was like, is it just the sports element to it, right? Hockey's like one of like the manliest sports out there, right? And then here's this like, queer romance that's like happening as part of it, but it's not the only thing that's like happening. So I thought that was one of the biggest reasons why it like kind of hit, this much popularity. And then you mentioned the timing. Where you're like, oh, it's lucky that it launched at this time. And like, no, I think they launched because, hockey is like happening right now because the Winter Olympics are happening. Another thing too that has been happening in romance is like hockey romances are super popular with like female romance novels right now. It's like one of the biggest growing like romance tropes. So it's funny that it's like now one of the most famous ones is a queer love story that's happening. And then the PR blitz from like 0 to like 100. I saw a tweet on last week saying like, do they know that like the actors are not actual hockey players because they're the ones like taking the torch in Milan? And I was like, let people have good stuff.
Yeah, well, and I would say like kudos even to the NHL and the Olympics
Hmm.
for leaning into it. I think the
Yeah.
NHL commissioner said I binged it all in one night or whatever, and I can't be alone in this. I've had just anecdotally so it's so funny. Sorry, so many women I know going to their first hockey games ever. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like in the last
Hmm.
few weeks. So I mean, kudos to the NHL. They're trying to ride this and say
Hmm.
all of these leagues have their baked in audience and they're always trying to get younger or get
More female.
international or get more female if they can, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, hopefully I think that the hockey leagues and the Winter Olympics more broadly are looking at this as a massive tailwind for the
Hmm.
sport. So that's a
Yeah.
nice
Yeah, that's
aligned incentive.
another really good point was that, yeah, you are seeing the sport itself welcome women. We also, called this out when, the whole Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce relationship started, that the NFL was very open to having more women come to the games and like really participate. We saw that also with like F1, where it's like you had Aston Martin that created like the Aston Martin green nail polish for like women. Ferrari created like streetwear collections for both men and women. So it's like really showing that like they want to be more open and they want to have that diverse, audience of like women actually attending. And kind of just based on this, it's like women are the ones that are like moving culture. They're the ones that are making these men popular, spending the money to go to like hockey and like, all that. So it's like, yay for like, paying attention to like female audiences and like what they want, because like this is kind of creating more of the content that is getting popularized for everybody. I'll be interested to see what happens going forward in terms of content that gets created, because so often a lot of like the content that is more like female like heavy kind of just gets relegated to streaming, right? Like when's the last time that like a big budget like probably the Sydney Sweeney Glenn Powell movie that came out, like, so hopefully that starts changing now that, straight men are watching a romance show on HBO.
Yeah. No, it's exciting. So takeaways, and obviously I think this is proof in the pudding about there's still appetite for diverse storytelling. I think you're absolutely right. I'm like, what good timing. The timing was intentional. that that was definitely good strategy on their part. But and then finally sort of leaning into a hit in a serious way, I think has turned this from a cult classic into a bona fide pop culture phenomenon. Real masterclass in marketing from that perspective. And I think interesting litmus test of the growing mainstream appetite for queer romance, or frankly, we could just say good romance stories, whether
Hmm.
they're straight or gay or whatever the case may be. I think this is proof positive of that.
Yeah, and then shout out to HBO because this was like a huge byproduct of their marketing, where it's like they saw that people were talking about it online and then just started, putting their stars out there as much as possible. HBO currently has, the latest Game of Thrones, they have The Pit. So they have a lot of shows that people are paying attention to, which I think also adds more like credence to I'll just watch it because I trust HBO content. The
Mm.
fact that it is on HBO and not Netflix opened it up to a wider audience, including, straight men that like would trust HBO content a little bit more than maybe Netflix.
It's like the recommended watch after The Sopranos, and it goes
Yeah,
straight to
exactly.
fans of the no, just kidding. Fans of Game of Thrones, no.
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
There's a lot of queer stuff that happened in Game of Thrones.
that's true, actually.
Yes, yes. So Zohran Mamdani has, speaking of marketing blitz, Zohran Mamdani has been everywhere. He's not only continued the video content strategy that he had started trying to get elected of like creating that content, like bite-sized videos of like what they're doing, what they're working on, during that day. I've seen videos related to public bathrooms opening, pre-kindergarten classes opening, one of like the sanitation department, another one about like the snow plows. It's really showing me that like he knows that the video strategy is like is very effective and it's working. Much like we were talking about earlier with Substack, like they know that like video is like the way to go because that's how people are ingesting content these days. Um, it's also showing to me that like he is using his popularity to show what's possible when government actually does the work that they say they're going to do, right? Like all these initiatives are things that he's basically rolled out since he started on January 1st, which is kind of crazy to think about that like there's all this work that's been done. But it also goes back to the process that he set up with the video content, right? Where it's like the turnaround is super quick. It doesn't take weeks of like, filming and like editing. It's like, no, we got to get this out as quickly as possible so that people know what's happening now and people can point to the things that we're actually doing and that we're actually affecting. And it's not just video, right? Like he's showing up on TV, he's showing up on radio stations, right? He showed up on the Weather Channel, Hot 97, New York 1, 1010 WINS. And then last night he showed up on The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon to like do a 1 minute like joke. And he got like a standing ovation from the crowd for like a minute, right? And it's showing that like he's pretty much welcome everywhere. I mean, I tweeted today, like, so does he just have an open invitation to all these things? Or is his PR people like going out there and being like, hey, Mamdani would like to talk about this? Like, I would just love to know the process of like what the comms team is like doing to ensure that he's kind of like blitzing all these like places. And it's not just one side or the other, right? Like I saw him on Fox News talking about how he had a conversation with Trump about ICE and how he's, thinks that it's not the right strategy. And he's speaking out against them being in Minneapolis and everything that's like happening there. He even mentioned that he had been texting Trump, right? Like these are all signals that show that like he's involved and he's doing the work. And it's showing a, stark difference from like the previous administration of Eric Adams, who like, would sometimes do press conferences for like weird stuff, right? Like the one I remember is the one for the trash cans for like, to combat the rats or whatever. And it's showing that he's out there and understands that talking about like what the work that he's actually doing is more important than just, silently doing the work, which is kind of a change in the way that like, politicians are, really going out there. So this is crisis comms as brand building. He's questioning we're seeing a lot of his opponents questioning why he's doing all this like video stuff. I think because it's showing that he is competent and he does know what he's doing, much to their chagrin, because they don't want him to be an effective mayor, and they don't want his policies to be popular. I think that's another thing that he knows that like he's doing here. He's going with a lot of the popular like things that people want. I'm sure they have polling showing what is being done with like people's tax dollars, showing how effective it can be, and then making it more popular by explaining what the benefits are to all the programs that are being, created or that are running as they should be, right? I saw a lot of people come onto like Twitter to talk about the snow plowing situation where it's like it had never been done as quickly or as effectively as it had been with Mamdani. And I had, I saw people questioning like, wait, what were previous administrations doing? Because like it never happened this quickly. He also was out there, shoveling snow himself. And like I saw, he showed up on camera without a hat, and so people are like, "Oh no, why aren't you wearing a hat? My mom thinks that he's gonna get sick because he's not wearing a hat." So it's all these like funny things that he's out there, kind of doing and showing his personality as like the brand, and I think it's doubly effective because it's showing how popular the actual policies that he wants to pass are. Did you
Yeah.
see all this? You live in New York, right?
Yeah. Very much so. He was in my neighborhood shoveling snow. I was
Oh,
sad to miss him.
amazing.
Um, yeah, I think you on some level, like, I mean, you nailed a lot of the things. The one that resonated with me the most, it's funny because you mentioned the pit just a few seconds ago. When people are talking about the pit, they use this phrase competency porn, where it's just like,
Mhm, mhm,
it's so satisfying to see people do something they're good at kind of
mhm,
thing. And I think a lot of what he's done is not I mean, if he's changed things, that's nice and good. Lord knows we need it. But I think on some level, it's a little bit of shining a light of like, there's just such a sense that politicians don't do anything and politics don't get
mhm,
anything done. And it's just a nice reminder of like, there is a vast infrastructure of bureaucracy. And I mean that in the good way
mhm,
that goes on seamlessly on a daily basis to allow us to live the lives that we live. And I think a big part of what Mondani's been doing has just been sort of turning the camera on that and saying, like, look at all the sanitation workers that we have. Look at all the salt that we've done. Look at
mhm,
all the preparations that we've put into place. Probably better than has been the case historically, that would be. But even if nothing else, even if this is just how things work as the status quo, I think showcasing the competency of the state, the city
mhm,
government in this instance, is really refreshing and pride instilling. Like you get some sense
mhm,
of like, patriotism, at least on a local level. You're like,
mhm,
man, we have experts at the top of
mhm,
the organization and they're doing a good job running things. And man, that's a nice feeling in politics. And to your point, under Eric Adams, at least he was, like, goofy, but you never really got the sense that he was getting much done.
mm.
And then, of course, nationally, you don't get the sense that, Trump's getting stuff done. It's maybe not stuff that you want, but,
Right.
I wouldn't call it competency, but, things are happening.
Mhm,
But anyway, so that's really a valuable element, and you have, like, that as a trust signal. I think for a lot of people, it's like when you're scared of something, oftentimes you just need to get to know it better. I think that's a really sentient, sort of thought as it pertains to Mamdani. Like, democratic socialist. He's
right.
not born in America. His mom's a filmmaker. It's all these like, his dad's a
He's
professor. Like
rich.
all these like, yeah, all these like,
His wife is even richer, you know?
yeah, these things are like you can see on paper and might put off like some heartland folks who look at this combination of adjectives and don't really see themselves in it.
Mhm,
And then you see who he is on camera and the work that he's doing. He's rolling up his sleeves. It's not only heartening, obviously, sort of as a resident, but I think to your point, from a communication strategy, he absolutely used this opportunity, never let a crisis go.
mhm,
Wasted kind of thing. He absolutely used this snowstorm to demonstrate his competency, to
mhm,
showcase his communication strategy, and not to be too woo about it, but to get his tenure sort of started on the right foot. You
mhm,
know what I mean? The snowstorm didn't end up being catastrophic. Who knows? Maybe that's because we
mhm.
prepared for it so well. Probably not. But I think he at least was over prepared, and that's kind of what I mean, that's just been his sentiment this whole time. Like he's enthusiastic, he's plucky, he's quick. And I think you see that in a leadership capacity, this being sort of his first real test, and you feel like you're in good hands. So
Mhm.
it's been impressive to see, and Lord knows it pops up on my feed all the time. I had friends texting me being like, about the snowstorm who don't live here, and they're like, "What's Mamdani doing?" And I sent them a link to one of the videos. I said, "Making IG videos, per usual." It goes back to this thing of like every great politician is just a master at whatever new technology there is. It's like Trump was the Twitter president, and Obama's the Facebook president, and you go back
Mhm.
to JFK was the TV president, and all those kinds of things. I think Mamdani's the vertical video president, vertical video
Mhm.
mayor.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, unfortunately, he
so
cannot be president,
yeah,
given the
yeah.
fact that he wasn't born here. But yeah, I think one other thing I wanna call out here is that, um, everyone is expecting him to fail. So he's using that attention to turn it back on city government, city employees that have been competent this whole time, um, and using that to show how government can actually do stuff for people. He's been doing that by over communicating, over preparing. It does show that he's seen what previous administrations have failed on. As you were talking about this, I used to live in New York, and I remember at the time De Blasio was our mayor, and there was a snowstorm. It always seems as they're never as bad as they say they're going to be, right? But the point is they're trying to get you to stay home in order to deter you from having anything catastrophic happen. But the way that he kind of approached it was more just like stay home. I feel like Mamdani's message was like, as a collective, let's all stay home. Let's chill at home. Let's, celebrate. Speaking of heated rivalry, he told people to stay home and watch heated rivalry, or to like, get the book from the library. And the library saw like, I think it was a 566% jump in people checking the book out because they wanted to read it. So it's showing that like, it's not just like, the snowplow getting attention, but it's also the New York Public Library system that's getting attention, telling you to like rent out the book, and like read it, stay home, chill. Like, and so he's doing it in such a like fun way that like, I saw people talking about this saying like that earnest millennial shit that like, is so popular with them. And it's like, okay, but it like works, people want to know that like it's more of a happy thing, and it's not like, there's a snowstorm coming and like, like dire, 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 like we have so much of that happening with everything else happening in the country, that if it like you can make a snowstorm that we're all preparing for, something that you can find joy in, then let's opt for that, So that's one of my, lessons to be learned here is like, if you can make something positive, like speak to the positives of it. I talked about this recently in terms of, watching Monsters Inc. and the realization that like marketing has a like scare floor problem, which is like we think that scaring people or making them angry is the way that's going to get us attention through like rage baiting. Maybe we start thinking about making them laugh, which is like the moral of the story for Monsters Inc., right? Is like getting them laugh, getting them to be joyful and like have positive interactions with you gives you more energy. Us all more energy, but then you as a company more energy because you're feeding off of the good vibes of the people that you're bringing in, and not all the negative stuff that gets created when you rage bait them into paying attention to you.
Well, and I think if I can transition on that note, on the topic of rage bait, this Monday, the New York Post, a fixture of the New York media scene, effectively a tabloid, but still newsy enough to kind of have plausible deniability, launched a West
Questionable,
Coast brand.
questionable.
Yeah, somebody asked me, they're like, "Is it news or a tabloid?" I was like, It's not an either or." So it's a big splashy effort. I wrote about the marketing campaign behind it, but they've hired dozens of people. I think it's going to be on the run to be, probably a newsroom of over 100 plus when it's all fully said and done. But
Wow.
they're doing an 8-week rollout with marketing elements in out of home, big billboards in San Francisco and LA. They're working with this food truck, the Yeasty Boys, which is this bagel shop, to sort of
Mhm.
wrap all the trucks and give away free items with one of them. And they're doing sort of a coffee sleeve promotion at 80 coffee shops across the city, and then digital and social campaigns in addition. And we talked about this a little bit up top with the Southwest element. We'll get into it more later, but they're trying to straddle this delicate tension of it's the New York Post brand that is pretty iconic with the typography and the sort of conservative tabloidy sensibility, but they're trying to tailor it for Californians. And so naturally you want to change it a little bit, but you want to import that brand identity, but customize it to make it local a little bit. It felt like a lot of the copy was written by New Yorkers thinking about what Californians might care about, kind of thing, rather than
I
like
mean, isn't that the
actually
New York
getting
Times as
Californians to
well?
talk. I mean, for sure, right? Like that's the whole like what do you call it? Sort of parachuting into a place or
Yeah.
whatever. Like so, I mean, at least kudos to them. They're going to have people on the ground. They're going to build it out from there. It might have been the marketing campaign that was a little bit misguided. Because I spoke with some Californian agency folks and they were like, this isn't how Californians talk. Um,
Yeah.
but it's, it's interesting because I think from a media perspective, there is an interesting trend that this is kind of hoping to act on, which is the sort of increasingly rightward shift, not only that we've seen in the country over the last several years, but specifically that we've seen in California, and even more specifically that we've seen in Silicon Valley, right? And so the New York Post would tell you that either their first or their second largest share of audience lives in California. So they're saying there's an unmet need basically for conservative, opinionated reporting. That's what they're going in to fill. It'll be an interesting litmus test to see how popular the product is, whether there really is this kind of conservative leaning or it's just something that Californians read after they've read their standard news and they want like a diversion or whatever the case may be. Um, but they're basically hoping to tap into this conservative inclination, really grow their audience, and in particular, maybe have some sway in San Francisco. It's an interesting marketing story too, frankly. One source said this kind of didn't feel like when you launch a newsroom somewhere, you want there to be some sort of homegrown affinity. Like, we're from here. We care about this. This is our backyard kind of thing. Whereas the New York Post kind of came in really with a bit of a middle finger and said, Californian, you guys have been doing things wrong. Your government is, upside down. You people aren't saying what they mean. They're hypocrites. We're going to tell the truth kind of thing. And it's really like, is this a message? I mean, to your point about like Mamdani and like making things nice, like, is this a message that inspires affinity? It feels more like a broadside, like you kind of come in and you antagonize everybody and maybe that message resonates with like a certain subgroup, but it doesn't feel like a big tint. You know what I mean? It feels like they're going into enemy territory and they know it. Um, so seeing how it's received will be really fascinating. And then seeing how this specific 8-week marketing campaign, which is the biggest they've done in recent history is what they're saying, at least a decade. So there's a lot riding on it, but it's owned by News Corp. It's a well-resourced institution, unlike a lot of other media companies nowadays that are kind of, spinning in death cycles. You have News Corp companies actively growing, generating more revenue, growing subscribers, growing audience. And I think this is a huge play for the New York Post to really set up camp in California, which I don't need to tell you, is the biggest audience there is in America. So if they can make this work, it could have pretty sizable ramifications for the sort of national media ecosystem.
Yeah, yeah. Two things that were interesting that you said was them saying that, the California audience is like, one of the largest, if not the largest. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, we have the biggest population, right? There's a lot of Republicans and right wing folks that live here. Up until the 1980s, I mean, it was a Republican state, right? Like Reagan came from here. Nixon also came from here. So we have, Republican governors slash, presidents that, came from California. And then the other thing, I question whether, like the readership wants a California Post like you as like the New York Post writing for California and like our politics, or if people are just interested in learning about New York politics and what's happening politically on in New York. So I will be curious to see like how, if the readership grows and how popular it gets, whether it does become more of a cultural footprint here given those two things. But I assume that they've done some research into the readership here of like who wants that, or frankly maybe they're willing to lose money in California in order to kind of build up a mouthpiece loud enough to start shifting politics in the way that they want things to be shifted, right? Like maybe they're making enough with, the New York Post and then all the other like news corp sources that they're willing to lose money in California in order to kind of grow that like cultural and political mouthpiece that like would be so much more important and effective for them. Kind of like we've seen with Twitter, right? Where it's like we saw Twitter switch hands and now it's become more of a right-wing platform where those are like the voices that get raised, the whole bots, situation. So that's a thing that, I'll also be curious about. One thing that, stood about their marketing rollout is, that some iconic, LA brands have, advertised for them, right? Like, notably to me was the LA Dodgers welcoming them to LA, right? The LA Dodgers owner is a very big, MAGA Trump supporter. So it's not surprising to me that, was something that probably came from the top down to tell them, hey, just send like, a welcome post to like the, California Post or whatever, right? But you did see pushback online from like, people saying like, why are you, becoming a mouthpiece for Rupert Murdoch, News Corp and all that, when we don't want that in California, right? I did see that like they are reporting more on like Hollywood stories, right? So one of the stories that went viral yesterday was the Josh and Benny Safdie like relationship and like why it broke, right? It turns out there was some like sexual assault that happened on like one of the films that they did. I think it was Good Times with Robert Pattinson. So it kind of like went told the backstory of like, why they're not like directing together anymore, right? For those of us that wondered why, one Safdie brother is doing the Smashing Machine and the other one is doing Marty Supreme, right? So they're kind of starting to do what they did in like New York and also in like the UK, right? With the like celebrity cultural commentary that like, people will pay attention to. They do seem to be approaching it in a way that's gonna be tantalizing to people, which is following celebrity gossip, right? And like what's
Yeah.
happening in LA and Hollywood.
Right, exactly. I mean, they have this franchise, Page Six, which here in New York
Hmm.
is like the probably go-to rag for celebrity gossip. And it's like, oh, this is tailor-made for Hollywood. I mean, you have to imagine Page Six is going to get no shortage of material having to do with Hollywood celebrities. So I think that will be a great offering. They're also really touting their sports coverage. The New York Post, I'm not a reader of it for its sports, but apparently has really great coverage of the New York sports scene. You made the point of, do people read the New York Post because they want to see what's going on in New York through like this perspective, or are they thinking to themselves, man, I wish I had something like that here and wrote about,
Hmm.
and it's a really good point. Somebody else brought that up. It's like, I think a lot of that viewership is kind of like voyeurism, like what's going on in New York is
Hmm.
refracted through this really weird prism. It goes back to what we were talking about at the very beginning of sort of, expressed behavior versus exhibited behavior. Like people say one thing and do another, it being the Post, it being News Corp, whatever. It's nice to see a media brand expanding. It's nice to see a media brand taking chances. And Lord knows there really might be a conservative readership in California that feels like it's not being served. And if they do that for them, then more power to them. So we'll see, though. I think it could have some interesting ramifications for what happens to the dominance of the Los Angeles Times, which has been historically kind of like the newspaper of record across California. And what does this mean for the New York Post? And does this open up new opportunities that it didn't have previously now that it has sort of a bureau on both coasts? Just in terms of takeaways, I think there's an interesting brand adaptation story here. How do you take something that's quintessentially of New York and transplant it into California and both preserve that sort of attitude, but also tailor it? We'll see if they've done that well. I think, like I said, the media landscape, the growing conservatism, is this going to feed into that? To your point, could this actually influence politics and local elections as it has here in New York? I think that very much could be the case. And then I think in terms of going back to what we were talking about again with Substack TV, my one criticism really of the rollout has been a real lack of video, lack of short
Hmm.
form video, lack of CTV video, which is interesting to me because that says to me that they're either not trying to reach young people or that they don't know how to reach young people. And if it's the latter, that's not good. If it's the former, that's really interesting. But the lack of video, especially after the Mamdani conversation we just had, is sort of inexplicable. If news organizations are always trying to reach younger audiences, and without video, they're not going to do that. So
Yeah, I mean,
it
who
has me
reads
believing.
news anymore?
Yeah,
You know, everything's done through like a video or, TikTok. I mean, it's a huge reason why TikTok was bought, right? Is to kind of influence what people are seeing, how they're seeing it. Video podcasts are on the rise as well, right? A lot of people are getting their news from Joe Rogan and from, Theo Vaughn and other like podcasters that are talking about the issues. So I think there is room to kind of have more of those like cultural or like influencing type of voices that don't necessarily lean one way or the other, but want to affect culture in some way. And I think maybe that's a thing here with what you were saying about young people is like, are young people, quick to choose one side or the other, right? We saw that in the 2024 election, more of them voted for Trump, right? But now we're starting to see that their numbers are going back to Democrats. So I don't think it's as cut and dry as it used to be. I guess we'll see in the 2026 elections where the numbers go. But I think as a media play, going to like the biggest market in the country, at least for the right, makes sense, even if they are going to lose money in it. Awesome. Okay, so overall takeaways. For I think all of it is just like the importance of video. We see that with Zohran Mamdani and like his campaign. And then we're seeing it with Substack TV, right? There's a reason why they're heading in this direction. They're seeing that Instagram is starting to put more emphasis on video. They're seeing that Netflix is bringing video podcasts. Substack has also made a play for podcasts and video podcasts. This is an obvious route for them to take. They're going to go through like the process of some of their creators being pissed off that it's no longer the long form house that it used to be. But there's reading the tea leaves that this is kind of where everything is headed. So it makes sense that they're, headed in this direction.
Yeah, absolutely. I think video for sure being a massive one. And then we've kind of talked about it's almost two different case studies here of how do you evolve a brand. And
Mhm.
you have the New York Post trying to do that with the California Post, but then you also have Substack doing that a little bit. And I think the difference is like Substack is a platform. And I think when platforms change, there, this is just a hypothesis, but I think there's more sort of friction or pushback on that. Whereas a brand, because brands can be sort of multimodal in a different way. So as long as it's the same voice, it can be a video, it can be a podcast, it can be a print ad, as long as it's the same character. But when the platform itself changes, I think that leads to a little bit more pushback. And I think you're seeing that with Substack being sort of punished for trying to evolve beyond what it originally started as, versus New York Post this is seen as, oh, this beloved brand that people go crazy for is now going to be available to a whole new community. That's a positive. So I think that there's an interesting platform versus brand sort of distinction there.
Where are you getting that the New York Post is a beloved brand?
In New
I'm kidding,
York,
I'm kidding.
yeah, it's yeah. People go
Um,
crazy for it. It's crazy to me, but
yeah.
yeah, it's
They do
I don't
have
know.
some of the best, like, pun headlines,
Mhm.
out there, so we'll see how big it kind of gets in California.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much, Mark, for joining me. Please let people know how they can find you.
Yeah, you can find my reporting on adweek.com. I have a media newsletter that goes out Wednesday evenings called On Background. It's free. You can sign up for that. Or you can just find me on every social media platform at Mark Stenberg 3.
Awesome. And then you can follow me at Sonia Bashez everywhere and the podcast at Meme Team Pod on YouTube and Meme Team Podcast on Spotify and TikTok. Thank you. Bye.